I'm Hanish Patel, and this is User Friendly, the show where we explore emerging trends in tech, media, and telecom, and how they impact business, operations, and the world around you. There is no doubt the past year and a half has been one of disruption and change. And as the pandemic magnified, so did the urgency for businesses to become more agile and resilient, with many CEOs finding themselves reevaluating business operations as well as their mindsets. As disruption and rapid transformation continue, leaders are challenged with defining a strong digital transformation strategy and driving its successful execution. The path ahead is full of opportunities, and it's an imperative that organizations use this moment to create a better future for their businesses, partners, and customers. Joining me today to discuss how businesses can build agility and resilience through digital transformation are Steve Hasker, President and CEO at Thomson Reuters, and Janet Foutty, Executive Chair of the Board at Deloitte US.
Thank you so much for having us. It's great to be here.
Thanks, Hanish. Good to be here.
Wow, perfect. Well, let's just jump straight into it. And as both of you know, on User Friendly, I really like to break down the topic into something digestible. Now, most of our listeners will be aware of the term digital transformation. But for those who are not familiar with it, can you explain what digital transformation is?
Yeah, I'm happy to. I think at its most basic level, the idea of a digital transformation is in fact a shift away from reliance on human beings and human intervention 100% of the time to more of a omni-channel or self-serve or machine-driven approach. And that can be to the generation of data in our business at Thomson Reuters, all the way through to the serving of customers, the billing and renewal of customers, and all of those different touch points. So I think at its most fundamental, it is a injection of machines and data where previously colleagues and human beings were managing and curating and overseeing a process in its entirety. But I also think one of the things that we've all got to be mindful of, we all sort of over time have had a digital business unit, a digital division, or a digital expert. And I think going forward, all of us need to be digital, and all of the processes that we put in front of our customers need to be digitized. And therefore, the sort of pretty stark distinction between digital and analog that we've seen over the last decade or so, I think that really has blurred. And the pandemic has significantly accelerated that blurring. And so I think the sort of calling out of digital as a separate thing and a digital transformation as a separate initiative may well soon be a thing of the past.
So I love that. Maybe I could just add a little bit of color. Steve, you passed my New York Times crossword puzzle test, because most of the definitions you see of digital transformation use the word digital and transformation in them. And if you think about a crossword puzzle or a dictionary, obviously you don't want to use the word to define it. So I love how you articulated it. The only thing I would add is I do think thinking about the talent and processes that actually help you drive either improve business operations and or drive new products to market, enhance customer experience. I think the move to new technologies to do that, how you think about the talent and process dimensions are also critical for a digital transformation.
Brilliant. And Steve, Janet, thank you for that. Because again, to both of your points, digital transformations are a word or a term, set of words that have been used a lot. And I think it's really helpful to really kind of buckle down on what that truly means. And what I'd like to do, Steve, you mentioned around acceleration and the pandemic, and certainly in many ways it has accelerated trends and amplified, if anything, the urgency to transform businesses to be more agile, to be more resilient. And Steve, thinking about that, what are some of the lessons learned from the past year for you, and how do you see other CEOs adapting in the year ahead and beyond?
Yeah, look, I think it was Satya Nadella at Microsoft who said a couple of months into the pandemic that at Microsoft they'd seen 4 years worth of digital transformation in 4 months. We've certainly seen that amongst our customer base. We serve about 500,000 law firms, tax and accounting firms, corporations, and government agencies in the United States and across the world. And, it's interesting to have the senior most partners of venerable law firms saying that they've become their own IT experts at home. and that they've become their own executive assistants. And so, I think that's just a very small example of the kind of transformation that each and every one of us have undertaken as we've had to cope with a virtual working environment. And that sort of played out across all of our customers, big and small, firstly. Secondly, I don't think it's going to reverse. I think the way in which we all operate from a day-to-day basis, the way in which we interact with technology, the ways in which we interact with each other have fundamentally changed. The idea that we could have a board meeting and approve, a significant acquisition in a purely digital environment without any face-to-face contact is just I think something we wouldn't have dreamed of a year or two or three ago. And there's countless examples of that. And so I think we've seen a very significant step change in behavior amongst many, many professions as a result of the pandemic. I also think that it won't reverse. Some things may revert as people start to drift back into offices to varying degrees. But by and large, I think many of the changes will endure. And many of the businesses and business models that have become prevalent will continue to accelerate, and those that have really struggled will continue to struggle. But then I think on a very, very different level, on a human level, one of the lessons for us was, you may remember in March and April of last year, it was quite difficult to discern how bad this situation was going to become. I think we were starting to get a sense for the severity of the virus. We were starting to get a sense for the degree to which we're all in this together. None of us were being singled out, and likewise, nobody was being excluded from the impact of the virus and the potential to get ill, even seriously ill, and even die. One of the things that we did was just to boil this down to a very, very simple focus, and that was on our people. We figured that if we looked after our people and made sure that our folks were kept safe, then our business would continue to operate, and maybe most importantly, our people would be able to continue to serve our customers. And that worked for us. There was a time where we wondered whether we were heading into the Great Depression. We wondered how long this would last. We wondered how severe the dip would be, and whether the sort of correction in equity markets and the freezing up of the financial markets would become systemic problems. It turned out that those things weren't, or at least it didn't turn into enduring issues. But I think the care and attention to our people was the single best decision we made here at Thomson Reuters.
I'd like to stick with the people thread here if we could. And certainly the past year has put that spotlight on many workforce challenges, including, say, remote working, virtual teams, shifting expectations around well-being, diversity, we've got sustainability and social impact. So then, Janet, how can organizations address these priorities while still continuing to evolve?
So great topic. And we could probably spend our whole conversation today on this. Yeah. So I'll try to keep it pithy, but I do think it is absolutely fundamental to the shift in the conversation from survival, as Steve talked about in terms of the beginning of the pandemic, to thriving today. And I've been thinking a lot about sort of the idea of the pursuit of thriving is about how we take each new reality, which we've had so many of over the last couple of years, and using it to really reimagine sort of the norms and the assumptions in ways that were totally not possible before, right? Think about a senior leader in a law firm becoming their own IT department, just as a lovely, simple example. So it's really become in my view, that this shift from survive to thrive depends on an organization becoming and really remaining distinctly human at its core. This idea of being distinctly human, I think, is so powerful, and maybe a couple of examples of how we've been thinking about this. So how do we integrate our workers' physical, mental, and social health into the design of work rather than addressing well-being with adjacent programs? Embedding well-being into work, and I've been trying to move away from the discussion of work-life balance for a long time, but embedding well-being into work design really helps your people experience well-being while they do their work, not just when they're away from it. And so good for thinking about how you really address the human need for quality of life, which can motivate people in a really different way. The second thing I've been thinking about here is how do you capitalize on worker agency, both in terms of something we've been talking a lot about recently, which is where people work, but also choice in terms of how you drive learning, adaptability, and impact. giving workers more control over what they do and what learning experiences they can pursue to really increase their engagement in a much more meaningful way. So when I think about the last year and the decisions that leaders had to make in terms of digital collaboration platforms, enabling worker choice, changing schedules, changing meeting norms, just even think about this conversation today, are all about how do we embed well-being and agency into the way the work gets done. And Steve said it so well, it is so distinctly human. And I think bottling what we've learned over the last 18 months to that end and figuring out how to drive that into our strategies and approaches going forward sort of sits at the heart of the answer to your question.
So I'd love to drill in on that, right? Both you've really put forward about being distinctly human, but yet we go back to the definition of digital transformation and looking at how some of the more human manual activities can now be taken over by potentially digital aspects, digital processes, other areas. How do we balance that? And how do you, as leaders of organizations, balance that?
I think part of it, I'll start, Janet, with a comment or two. I think part of it is a segmentation of different sort of tasks and responsibilities. In an ideal environment, the sort of digitization of an automation of many tasks actually is additive in value to our colleagues because it frees them up to do the fun stuff. To Janet's point about moving from work-life balance to sort of wellness at work, nobody wants to take hours and hours performing, sort of grinding through boring tasks. And the extent to which a digital transformation frees up knowledge workers to focus on value-added tasks. And, one example for us at Thomson Reuters is our salespeople relying on digital technologies for CRM and dynamic intelligence around their customers and their upcoming calls, and automatic billing and renewal and resolution of customer issues. The best salespeople just want that. They want all of their time, their waking hours, or their working hours, to be focused on selling and making customers happy, not troubleshooting and problem solving and doing administrative tasks. So in a perfect environment, what digitization does is significantly additive to the employee experience because it means that the job is more interesting, is more diverse, is more dynamic and intellectually engaging. Now, in the real world, obviously, there are some places where that means that jobs and roles are displaced and moved to lower cost locations or replaced by machines. And I get that. But I do think that positive aspect of it is often overlooked.
So I would just underscore Steve's point with a frame that I've been thinking about, which is this intersection of people and machines, AI in particular. Mm-hmm. We've sort of come up with this phrase or frame called super teams, which is you think about how do the machines or how does AI actually complement your team, and thinking about it as a member of your team. It's a little bit to Steve's earlier point about digital is not its own thing, but this idea that AI is embedded in the work that your team is doing through this frame of super teams has been a really interesting frame of reference to help us think about not replacing people with machines or AI, but complementing them and performing the less interesting, more mundane, and more predictable tasks to free up our teams and our people to do much more interesting and important things.
Off the back of that, I'd like to shift gears a little. And Janet, I read your recent point of view, how digital transformation and a challenging environment are building agility and resilience. And in there, you highlight 5 focus areas. I would love for you to cover what they are and some of the steps leaders can take now to successfully transform.
So I think an important frame before we talk about those is and I wanted to build a little bit more on the very early question you asked us about what is digital transformation, to talk about brownfield and greenfield transformation, because I think the course of actually, frankly, more than just the last 18 months, but it's been really highlighted in the last 18 months, is those 2 types of transformations. And I think about brownfield transformation is really improving what you have, driving efficiencies, enhancing customer experience, growing market share. A couple of the examples we've talked about today have been just that. Greenfield transformation is about how do you have digital capabilities that the same digital capabilities that underlie a brownfield optimization that allow you to bring an innovative or disruptive idea, product, operating model to market really quickly, which is absolutely what the market is demanding. So if brownfield enhances the present, greenfield really builds the future of the business. So I think that's an important backdrop to how we talk about this, because when I laid out sort of the 5 things that are critical to a digital transformation success, you could look at them and say that they're really sort of tried and tested in driving any major change, whether it is a change to how your business operates today in a brownfield way, or how do you really innovate and push your thinking for something net new. And the first, and probably won't surprise you, and Steve and I have actually had some really good conversations about this on some different topics, is leadership. And that's twofold. Mm-hmm. One is absolute clear sponsorship and ownership from the top of the organization. But it's also having someone dedicated to the transformation that can really effectively communicate the why and the how throughout the organization. The second is mindset. We've talked a lot about mindset already today and the mindset of agility. And how do you unpack the business orthodoxies that we all know live deeply in our organization that might hinder agility? The third is talent. How does the workforce and how do our teams need to evolve to facilitate transformation? We've talked already today about how we intersect, but how does the workforce as a whole need to look differently going forward? Partnerships is a dimension of digital transformation that I think is sometimes underserved in the conversation. The problems and topics that we're talking about solving with digital transformation are so complex and so sophisticated. Often within our own organizations, we do not have the capacity or capability or frankly want to be the experts in everything that we need to do to drive transformation. So this idea of what your partnerships look like that allow you to co-create and innovate that can frankly help your own organization as well as your partners sort of beyond the transaction. And then the last, of course, is innovation, which is how do you look at the digital technologies, cloud, AI, as really R&D foundations, whether you're in brownfield or greenfield, how do you put an innovation lens into the work that you're doing to push your thinking? So those are the 5 things I've been thinking and talking about. They're very intertwined, but I think can be really differentiating. But I guess I'll finish where I started with leadership, which is clarity of who's ultimately responsible for the transformation and how do you set tone from the top. Steve, what's your reflections on those? What would you add?
No, I think that's really well said, Janet. And one of the things that we've wrestled with our change program, which is really a top to bottom transformation of Thomson Reuters, is the degree to which it should be sort of top down with bottoms up. And how do we get 25,000 people engaged, and to the extent it's appropriate, how do we get the customer base engaged as well in helping design and drive that transformation? I won't say that we've gotten to the bottom of all the answers, but I do think your point about accountability is really well taken. It does need to be clear who is responsible for what. It also needs to be the communication around the end goal and as much detail and excitement around the journey are really important parts to mobilizing 25,000 people to get them involved and get them energized around it. So I think that's a question that we're wrestling with and one that sort of sits alongside a number of the points you made.
You sort of highlighted my partnership comment, which is your clients as well and your customers as well. So partnerships are not just with the dimensions of your supply chain or your technology partners or your professional services firms, but it's your clients and your customers when you think of the value chain. So that's a perfect highlight of one of the dimensions that I was thinking about.
Yeah, exactly.
And Steve, if I may, you mentioned a change program, and certainly I've been reading about how that's for you guys at Thomson Reuters pivoting to more of a content-driven technology company. Do you mind going into a bit more detail of what that really entails and more importantly, why now?
Yeah. To Janet's point, this really started and always starts with our customers. I joined Thomson Reuters about 16 months ago, and I had a chance to meet with many of our customers. I have a bit of a hokey rule, which is I like to speak with at least one customer every single day. And what I heard from our customers consistently was we Thomson Reuters, we love your content, whether that's your legal content or your tax and accounting content or your fraud, risk and compliance related content. And in many cases, we love your people. So they talk about a particular Thomson Reuters colleague with whom they've worked over a number of years and on whom they rely. But we don't love the customer experience. The sort of process of getting to know your products, using your products, renewing, billing, getting answers to specific technical questions. It's not fun. It's not seamless. It's not intuitive. It's not fast. It's not integrated. And so with that, we said, okay, we've got to change this. And we faced that moment, as the pandemic started to develop. First and foremost, amongst all of us, endure a global pandemic, first in 100 years. And secondarily, operate a business that's publicly listed that has obligations to Wall Street. And thirdly, overlay a change program. And we thought about that for a little bit, and I certainly gave it some thought. But in the end, the answer was simple. The answer was yes, we do. We need to overlay the change program because our customers are demanding it. Our customers are demanding it. If anything, to the earlier points made about the impact of the pandemic on digital transformations, the pandemic has accelerated customer needs and customer demands. And candidly, it's raised customer expectations in very significant ways. All of our customers, whether they be lawyers or tax and accounting professionals, compliance, risk professionals, executives within corporations, government officials, they all, like we, have an iPhone or an Android phone, and they're used to seamless digital, self-serve, omni-channel experiences. And when they come to work and deal with a Thomson Reuters product, they have the same, if not higher, expectations of us as they do from the operating system on their mobile phone. And it was really that realization that said, okay, we've got to overlay the change program. We've got to go as fast as we can. We think it's a 3-year program. We're taking 2 years to get through it. And it really has a couple of dimensions. The first and most important is to overhaul and fundamentally reinvent the customer experience. So that's the first area of focus. And the second area of focus is on our own internal talent. Operating a business that's complex like ours and then overlaying the change program just requires that we have a self-replenishing pipeline of world-class talent and that talent be very, very diverse. And so those are really the things that we're pushing hard on. And here we are 6 months into a 2-year program, and pleased to report it's going very, very well. But of course, lots of hard work to get through from here on out.
Brilliant. And Janet, from your perspective, in terms of how we're evolving as a firm in a way that, again, pushing on the talent experience and very much the customer experience, I'd love to get your thoughts for our audience on that as well.
Yeah, Steve gave sort of wonderful examples of his client base. We have a much broader, we have a very, 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 very broad client base and a broad set of services. And so I look at this really, really crisply, which is our clients are demanding it. So think about actually a place where we have some common ground between our two organizations, which is the tax function of our clients. We absolutely have to meet our customers where they are now, which means digitally, which Steve explained, I think, very clearly. Both ours and our clients' competitors are upping their game around speed and agility to market. And the new world of certainly virtual and hybrid require it in terms of how and where work gets done while maintaining culture. Mm-hmm. And we haven't talked too much about culture today, but I think a critical part of this conversation. And then I was going to pick up on a thread that Steve talked about in terms of the team. But I also think in the conversation we're having a lot of within our own organization is that we need to rely on and push our thinking on digital transformation as it relates to more equitable systems, from how we think about sourcing, retaining, and advancing talent to what we do in the market. That technology will expose what's not working and what will help get us on the right path when it's not working. So technology and digital transformation has so many key dimensions, but how we think about equity is one that is also really important to me personally and really important within our organization. And I've certainly found lots of common ground in the business community around that conversation.
Mm-hmm. So let's stick with technology and that kind of drive and push around digital transformation. And again, we hear a lot of buzzwords: cloud, artificial intelligence, machine learning. all of those aspects that are going there. So the two of you, as leaders, and as you advise in other leaders, how can they really leverage these capabilities and how might they truly impact the future of work?
I think that as leaders, it's really important for us to sort through the realities and the potential impact on our businesses from these technologies, from the buzzwords. So, you mentioned cloud and AI and machine learning. It's just a few of the concepts that are now becoming very, very prevalent. I think for us at Thomson Reuters, we're making a wholesale migration to the cloud, to the public cloud. And with that, we, I think, are hopeful that our cost curve becomes more variable, that our data is even more secure. But more than anything, it's about flexibility. It's about flexibility in our supply chain and a very significant step up in terms of agility and what we can do for our customers. And so we're laser focused on cloud transformation that achieves that objective. And it needs to result, to my earlier points, in a fundamentally better customer experience. Otherwise, it's really a journey that's not worth taking, right? Because to move from very sophisticated and high-performing owned and operated data centers to a public cloud environment is not a simple transformation. So we need to see the benefits. And then in terms of AI and machine learning, I mean, these are some of the most sort of thrown about terms nowadays. I would say the things that we're looking for from AI and machine learning are first and foremost automation, and therefore faster, more reliable performance of sort of relatively mundane tasks. And the second is a step change in our predictive capabilities. We have a product called Westlaw, which is the leading source of legal and litigation research in the markets in which we operate. And we've added over the last couple of years a functionality and product launch around Westlaw Edge. What it enables a litigator to do is essentially understand not only all of the case law that pertains to that particular matter, but also to understand that if I'm on one side of a litigation and Janet is representing a client on the other, it understands for this type of matter, and the last 10 or 20 or 30 times that Janet has handled a matter like this, what arguments has she made? It is then able to predict how those matters resonate with a particular judge and how he or she has responded to those arguments around this kind of matter. And so it won't predict an outcome of litigation in a court case, but it does just about everything else in terms of preparing a litigator for these arguments. And that for us just adds a level of prediction and a level of confidence amongst our customers that previously was not available.
What a great example of how I think about AI and ML, which is disruptive, but also driving intelligent automation. And so that's a perfect example. And I thought your articulation of cloud at its start, an enabler, a cost play, and then an efficiency, and then over time about really amplifying innovation and flexibility as your business evolves and the shape of it changes and grows. I think if I would sort of take a step back, I think we challenge organizations to think about not just the buzzword bingo and the pilot du jour, but the real why you would take advantage of what the digital technologies allow you to do. That frankly underpins all the discussion we've had about culture and change management as well, is the why and the to what end. And those were excellent examples.
Brilliant. So then, to close out, I'd like to ask the both of you a two-part question, if I may. And the first one is, what defines a strong digital transformation strategy? And then, what makes for an effective execution of it?
Well, I answered a little bit in my last question, which is an ambition and a recognition that ambition can evolve as you understand what digital technologies can do. And frankly, all the discussion we've had around people, how your people can sort of adapt and drive additional change, both within how your business exists today, but also excitingly, what really different businesses and capabilities and services you can offer to your existing clients and net new clients as you go forward. That's sort of what sits at the core of that for me. And it does get back to mindset and leadership in terms of a strong digital transformation.
Yeah, Janet, I agree with that. I think ambition and adaptation are core to this. The other thing I suppose that I've learned, to some extent the hard way, is the importance of momentum. I think when you start the execution part, which is always the hardest part of any transformation, particularly a digital transformation, you have to focus on just building momentum. I think there's a temptation to sort of wait for the perfect answer to become clear, or sort of go in search of perfect execution, when the single most important thing, particularly when you're trying to move a large and complicated organization forward, I think, is that build momentum. As one of my bosses early in my career said, look, just find me some momentum, because if you can get that, good things will happen. Talented people will want to come and get involved. Partners will come out of the woodwork and want to be helpful and participate and benefit from what we're all trying to do. And it just builds upon itself. So I think for me, I've been in situations where I've gone searching for a perfect answer and failed to just focus on getting some momentum and getting things moving. I think the other thing is a difficult balance to strike between consistency and adaptability. So, the key to any execution, I think, is to keep it really simple and to be very consistent. I think if I sort of go back to the most effective executors with whom I've worked, they've been able to, in a sense, dumb it down, whatever the complicated initiative is, to a couple of key themes, and then they're just always coming back to those themes, and they don't divert. You see them 1 year after the next, and they're still talking about the same thing. They're hammering them through, and they know they're starting to get traction when other people start repeating it back. And I think balancing that with Janet's point about, okay, so when and how do you adapt? If you've sort of set up a couple of key themes and you're hammering away at those, at what point do you say, okay, within those themes, or even counter to those themes, we face a new situation, we face a new competitor, we face a more expensive, time-delayed execution path on one of the critical issues than we expected, and we've got to adapt. And I think, that's where the real sort of art and the science of successful execution come together. And that the best executions of digital transformation programs, I think, balance those things really skillfully.
So maybe my closing comment there would be, with all we talked about sort of the buzzwords and the language, which you've just articulated, is it's about the fundamentals. And I could not agree more that it is about consistency of message and consistency of execution and real clarity. So excellent point. Thank you.
Janet, Steve, any final thoughts?
For many people, and certainly, many of my colleagues here, the whole sort of push to digital and the digital transformation is pretty terrifying, particularly for folks who are sort of 20 and 30 years or more into their careers. Whenever there's a conversation around digital transformation, digital fluency, you can tell their body language and their language indicates that, they're sort of thinking, okay, this is the part of the conversation where I cease to be relevant. Mm-hmm. And I cease to have the right skills to maintain my career. One of the lessons that we've learned here over the last 12 months is digital fluency is about open-mindedness, and it's about a mindset. Because the fact of the matter is, in order to be relevant, we all have to be digital executives. And we all have to be digital colleagues. We can't sort of say, well, I'm analog and I'm not a tech person, and I'm not open to learning that. But similarly, none of us truly have as much expertise as we think we do in the topic, because it's changing so fast. And if we've gotten on top of whatever the right set of technologies that are relevant to our jobs today, sure as heck there'll be something new tomorrow that we'll have to learn and relearn. For me, I think that the key to this transformation, or the key to building large-scale digital fluency, is just making sure that you put people in a safe place where they can be very open-minded. They can ask, lots of pretty basic and fundamental questions without any fear of doing so, and that they really are in a mindset of, I'm going to come to work and I'm going to learn a few things today, and my skill set is going to improve as it pertains to digital technologies and their use. And back to Janet's point, it is very, very fundamental. But I think it's important, and it's important for all companies, particularly those that have, like Deloitte and like Thomson Reuters, that have some extraordinarily talented, long-tenured colleagues, who've built up domain expertise over long periods of time and customer relationships over long periods of time. It's not a trivial point to make them feel safe and confident and lean into the changes and the new technologies.
If I could just add one additional point, the last, call it generation or two of technology leaders, I think have been able to experiment and test and proof of concept. And then sometimes say, I'll sort of leave the big transformation for the next set of leaders, sort of not on my watch. Mm-hmm. And I do think that the pandemic has brought us to a place where there's sort of no time and space for not on my watch. And so I think the urgency and the clarity that we have to collectively and individually act now is really been highlighted over the last year. And I'm excited to see what it will bring.
While the past year certainly presented its challenges with the pandemic testing our ability to respond quickly, innovate, adapt in the face of fast-moving change, there's certainly an opportunity for organizations to use digital transformation to amplify their product or service, innovation strategy, and as we heard from Steve and Janet, the customer experience, the employee experience, and kind of talked about how let's not fear digital, right? It's going to free us up to do the things that we love, the things that can be more creative. And as Janet mentioned, it's a part of a super team of talented individuals plus technologies to really transform organizations for the betterment of the employee and the customer. And Janet and Steve, as both you mentioned today, there's definitely many things that define a strong digital transformation strategy when building momentum and really having that ambition. But it's clear that it's imperative that businesses and executives really focus in on those fundamentals and have that ability to adapt and have the right mindset to build a path towards a real strong future. And thinking about those, I want to thank the both of you today for joining me on the pod. Steve, Janet, wonderful conversation for you guys to take the time out to talk about digital transformation. So thank you ever so much. And until next time, happy listening. Thanks for listening to User Friendly. To subscribe or listen to more episodes, search for Deloitte User Friendly in your favorite podcatcher or find us online at userfriendly.deloitte.com. If you like what you hear, please rate us on Apple Podcasts and leave a review. The opinions expressed by guests on this podcast belong to them and do not necessarily reflect those of Deloitte. This podcast should not be deemed or construed to be for the purposes of soliciting business for any of the companies mentioned, nor does Deloitte advocate or endorse the services or products provided by these companies.